Alrighty trainers, TaeganAdventures here. So, tomorrow Kyogre is swimming back into the ocean. It's going back to its own territory and replacing it in Tier 5 raids in Pokémon Go is Groudon. Now, Groudon will be coming to Tier 5 raids in Pokémon Go tomorrow. As of the time this video is going up, so you can be sure to have a really exciting time raiding Groudon. This is the third time that Groudon has appeared this year, so you should at least have some experience battling Groudon in Tier 5 raids, but for those newer players perhaps, or for those players who just recently got back into Pokémon Go, that is what this video is for. So I'm going to give you guys the best tips and tricks on how to beat a Groudon in Tier 5 raids, as well as how you might want to potentially use it in PvP, or as a raid counter, or as an attacker in general. So the first thing to actually know is Groudon's really insane stats. Now, Groudon does share the exact same stats as Kyogre, a 270 base attack that's really monstrous, 228 base defense, and 205 base HP. It has a really wide move pool to back it up. Mud Shot is its only good fast move, but Groudon does get a variety of charge moves like Solar Beam, Earthquake, and Fire Blast, all of which are pretty good attacking moves, especially Fire Blast covering for its Grass and Ice type weakness, and Solar Beam covering for its Water type weakness. So overall, if you want to use a Groudon in PvP, you should be able to keep your weaknesses in check with one of those coverage moves in Solar Beam or Fire Blast. Really, it's up to you which kinds of Pokemon you want to cover for and how you want your team members to play into each other's weaknesses. But anyway, I digress. So Groudon, being a pure ground type, will be weak to Water, Grass, and Ice type attacks. Now, of course, the Grass type attackers are going to be the same Grass type attackers that I recommended for Kyogre, namely Sceptile, Venusaur, Leafeon, Tangrowth, Roserade. Those are pretty much your sleeper picks in terms of Grass type attackers. All your Grass type counters will take super effective from Fire Blast, so you want to make sure you do not send in your Grass types on Fire Blast. I would recommend sending them in on either Earthquake or Solar Beam because they resist Solar Beam. And as for Earthquake, Roserade and Venusaur take neutral effective, whereas the other Grass types resist Earthquake. But at least when going up against a Solar Beam Groudon, all Grass types will resist Solar Beam. So definitely send in your Grass types on a Solar Beam Groudon. Now, Ho-Oh does get an honorable mention because of its flying typing, giving it an immunity to its Mud Shot and Earthquake. Ho-Oh with Solar Beam will be a pretty good pick. Although it doesn't have good DPS, Ho-Oh is still able to dish out consistent damage considering Ho-Oh's decent stats: 239 base attack, 244 base defense, 214 base HP. So if you've gotten a Ho-Oh with Solar Beam from your research breakthrough box, it's definitely one to send in on Groudon. And speaking of flying types, Gyarados is also a pretty good flying type, and adding on to that, Gyarados is also a water type, meaning it gets stab water type attacks with Waterfall and Hydro Pump, and it's really good attack stat. 237 base attack, it's gonna dish out those attacks and do really consistent DPS, especially with Gyarados' immunity to Groudon's ground type stab moves. Now, of course, Kyogre, which we just got in Tier 5 raids recently, is gonna be a really good counter for a Groudon as well, but you want to be careful of Solar Beam. In fact, you want to be careful when sending all of your water types in on a Solar Beam Groudon, because all of them would take super effective. Kyogre here is no exception. Waterfall and Hydro Pump, again, likewise with Gyarados, would serve pretty well on a Kyogre here. With the higher attack stat of 270 base, it will do a lot of damage right there with the Hydro Pump. And considering we just got access to Kyogre right before we got access to Groudon, I think Kyogre should be pretty much accessible to most of you if you've got a chance to raid Kyogre. As for your other water types, though, a Feraligatr with Hydro Cannon would still be serviceable, although Hydro Cannon is a Community Day move, so it's only available to the select few who attended Totodile Community Day. But otherwise, a Feraligatr with Hydro Pump is still a pretty decent substitute. Both Hydro Cannon and Hydro Pump Feraligatr do similar DPS when compared to each other, so for those who do not have a Kyogre or a Gyarados, you can bank on Feraligatr with Hydro Pump to do some consistent DPS. And speaking of Community Day movesets, Swampert is likely to get Muddy Water or Hydro Cannon for its Community Day moveset. It has not been explicitly confirmed by Niantic or the Pokémon Company themselves, so the best option on a Swampert for now would be Waterfall and Surf. It does slightly more DPS than a Feraligatr with Hydro Cannon, so you might want to prioritize using your Swamp over Feraligatr. Of course, Swampert should be more accessible during during Mudkip Community Day once that's done, but that would be after Groudon leaves Tier 5 raids, so probably not going to come in much use here, so anyway, I digress. And of course, giving the honorable mentions here, we have Palkia. Palkia is a legendary Pokemon from the Sinnoh region, which just left the raid pool earlier this year, so probably not going to be very accessible for those of you who did not raid a Palkia back when it was in the raid pool. Nonetheless, Palkia with Hydro Pump is going to do really good DPS, on par with Kyogre as one of the best water type attackers in the game. In this case though, Palkia is going to do really good DPS, 20.91 DPS, going to do a lot on the Groudon. And as for the ice types though, Glaceon, Mamoswine, and Weavile are your go-to picks here. All three of them are new additions from the Sinnoh region Pokedex. Definitely those three are worth using, especially if you have enough Sinnoh stones for the Mamoswine and the Weavile. You should definitely bank on using those. Mamoswine does have a really good attack stat and base HP, a very bulky Pokemon there. For Weavile, it is a glass cannon. It has a really good attack stat, but you might want to be careful when sending it in on a Groudon with Fire Blast because it will just one-shot your Weaviles left, right, and center. As for Glaceon though, just like its leafy brother Leafeon, it does have a really good defense, so it can take hits, it can throw out those hits. Overall, it's a pretty new addition as well. We just got it in the most recent wave of Sinnoh Pokemon, and it is definitely a Pokemon I would recommend when raiding a Groudon. Now Mewtwo gets a shout out here because of its insane attacks. With Ice Beam, it's going to do a lot, coming off a base 300 attack. Definitely one of the best, if not the best, coverage moves in the game for a Mewtwo, so you might want to consider using a Mewtwo with Ice Beam if you have one. If you don't, it's alright. There's still other counters. You can use the other counters I've mentioned before this one here. So that's going to be it for the Groudon counters. If you're wondering how many people you need to bring to a Groudon raid for just the average high-level player between level 30 and 35, I would recommend groups of 3 to 6. For the lower-level players below level 30, I would recommend about 7 to 8, maybe 9 if you want to bring the extra firepower, or if you don't have the right counters, or maybe you just don't have them powered up enough. Yeah, by all means, bring the extra firepower if your group of trainers is not sufficient to beat the Groudon. Now, as for the optimal weather to face a Groudon in, definitely sunny weather would provide a weather boost on the Groudon, as well as a weather boost on your grass-type counters. Sunny weather is definitely the best weather to raid your Groudons in, but you want to beware of Fire Blast though. Fire Blast is just going to wreck your team if you solely rely on your grass types. Now, if you are fortunate enough to live in a rainy or snowy area, definitely you can get the rainy or snowy weather boost depending on where in the world you live. Currently in the southern hemisphere it is winter right now, so for those of you guys in the southern hemisphere right now, you should take advantage of the snowy weather boost if it's snowing in your area. For those of you who need the perfect IVCPs, I've got you covered as well. It's going to be 2351 for a non-weather boosted Groudon, meaning any weather apart from sunny or clear weather, and 2939 for a weather boosted Groudon, which is in sunny or clear weather. So that's going to be it for the raid guide section of Groudon. I just want to go over the offenses of Groudon really quick, as well as how it can potentially be used in battles, whether it's PvP or a gym or a raid. Definitely Groudon is going to bring a useful asset to your team. Now I've pitched 3 of the most commonly used ground type attackers, Groudon, Rhyperior, and Garchomp. Against certain scenarios you might potentially use a ground type attacker. First up are the electric types against an Electivire and a Zapdos. Zapdos won't be found in a gym, so it's probably going to be a PvP type of scenario. You can see that Garchomp is definitely one of the best in terms of ground type TDO. It's really bulky and can hit really hard as well. But Groudon does have its edge here in terms of DPS due to its really high attack stat. Garchomp is slightly bulkier, so you might want to bring a Garchomp if you value the bulk. But in any case, Groudon would be a really solid pick for just pure DPS. In terms of the water types though, Groudon does get Solar Beam, so it can counter the water types. Rhyperior absolutely gets wrecked by water types, so do not consider using a Rhyperior against the water type at all. For those of you who don't know already, Rhyperior is 4 times weak to a water type attack, so definitely do not send in your Rhyperiors on a water type. Groudon actually does really good DPS actually. It performs similarly to Garchomp in terms of TDO, so Garchomp and Groudon are definitely 2 of the best ground type attackers. As you can see, Garchomp with the dragon typing is especially especially diverse. Gets a lot of coverage. The only big concern is ice type attacks, but I digress. The last scenario I've put them all up against is a Venusaur. Groudon and Garchomp both get really similar move pools, including access to Fire Blast, so it can counter grass types as well. If you want to use Fire Blast to counter the ice types that might threaten Garchomp, by all means, it's a pretty good coverage move on Garchomp, but it's also a pretty good coverage move on Groudon as well, to check the ice and grass types. So as you can see, Garchomp comes out on top in terms of its DPS, godly DPS right there. In terms of TDO, they both perform similarly, so you can use either or. Basically, the one thing you can take away from these scenarios is that both Groudon and Garchomp will be really useful ground type attackers in the meta, and hopefully you might find some place on your team for a Groudon or a Garchomp. Hopefully it will see greater usage in PvP once Garchomp becomes more regularly available, or once Groudon becomes more accessible to the public through research breakthrough boxes as well. So that's going to be it for my Groudon guide video here. Hopefully you're more informed of how you can potentially use a Groudon in PvP, raids, gym battles, etc. And hopefully you're more prepared on how to take on a Groudon for yourself with your group of teammates. And yeah, happy raiding, and I will be seeing you in the next video. This has been TaeganAdventures. I'll be signing off right now. Peace out.